I think we can begin again. And what we're talking about again this week is right action. As most know, we're taking the Eightfold Path, one bit at a time, and we're trying to talk about the same subject in successive weeks, digging a little bit deeper. We had been talking about right view and how right view informs right action. Looking at what the Buddha talked about in right action, number one was not killing. That's seen as the ultimate divorce from life. Also not stealing and avoiding harmful sexual conduct. The not stealing, the more we get into looking at the Buddhist perspective on life, there's really very little we can own. Ownership of property is kind of nebulous. Like we have things that pass through our hands through life, but like how do we really own them? And if the less we own, the less people can steal, and the less that we're going to want. As far as avoiding harmful sexual conduct, that applies to ourselves as much as to anyone around us. I think the Buddha saw it more as staying committed to a relationship, but definitely killing was the major part of what attracted his attention. And also in the Dhammapada, looking at what the Buddha said we should do was to avoid unskillful action, do what is good, and purify the mind. The part about killing that I wanted to look at is how our attitudes can change about that. It's kind of seems like as if we're in the house and it's hot this time of year, and like mosquitoes get in or something, or insects, and we kind of thoughtlessly can kill them. And that may not be a huge thing in itself, but in predetermining how we act, these small acts of killing can kind of give cover to more harmful acts. If it's okay to kill, an insect because, like a mosquito, because it might bite us, is it okay to kill a moth because it might be eating something of ours? It might then become okay to kill a cockroach or a centipede because it's ugly, because we don't like the way it looks. And if that's okay, then is it okay to kill, I don't know, a mouse or a chipmunk just because it's there and it might do some kind of harm to us in the future? And then, is it okay to kill a chicken or a fish or a dog or something that people take for food? Is that okay? Because, it becomes necessary for our nutrition. And it kind of feels like a slippery slope. Is it then okay to kill something because we like that act of killing, hunting for hunting's sake? Is it okay to kill for the greater good? A lot of harm has been done, I think, in the name of the greater good. Now, I don't say it all begins with killing ants, but that's a place that we can look at. When we talk about this, in Sangha, it's not as though anyone has to immediately take on the precepts and not kill anything, but it's something that I think is important to look at, to see how we feel about it, and to see how that fits in with our own ethical code. When talking about, ethics, the Buddha said that, trying to find liberation without an ethical code is like trying to row a boat across a pond or a flood while you're still tied to the dock. It's just not going to happen. So going forward, I think it's important to look at, like the fact that our current actions inform our future view, and our view informs future actions. So Tracy, do you have something to add to this? We're both going to talk about this week.
Yeah, so I was thinking, my dad is a big lover of jazz, and in some ways what Lee and I were thinking about is it makes me think about a riff of music and kind of starting in one place and seeing where it goes and then ending up in another. So we're sort of playing with that today. So in this loop that Lee was talking about, there's this story that the Buddha told his son, or an exchange between them, where the Buddha says to his son, what do you think, Rahula, what is a mirror for? And his son says, for reflection. And the Buddha says, well, in the same way, Rahula, bodily acts and verbal acts and mental acts are to be done with repeated reflection. And so the Buddha went on to teach his son that before you act, we must always ask ourselves, will what I'm about to do, is it going to harm myself? Can it harm someone else? Or will it harm both, on both ends of it? Another way to think about that is, will the consequences be painful? Will the results be painful? And like Lee was mentioning before, this idea of the slippery line and honest reflection, if we are looking, if we're observing, if we're bearing witness with clarity and with honesty, right? A reckoning, I love that word, reckoning, then we have a better shot at, shot, that's kind of a strange word to use when Lee's talking about killing, right? We have a better chance, right, of our actions being skillful. And then that made me think the slipperiness of it and our actions being skillful. It made me think of this series of sentences that are said by the Buddha, where he says, I am the owner of my actions. I'm heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, and have my actions as my arbiter. Whatever I do for good or for evil, to that I will fall heir. So our actions are really all we have. They're what we own. They're basically everything that we own. The only thing when I leave this world that I'll still own are my actions. And what people will remember about any of us are our actions. And when I was thinking of this morning, I was thinking about joy and all those people that you named, Joy, several weeks ago for us, of all these people that you've lost. And I was thinking about what we remember about them, or what you carry with you, or what any of us carry with us when we remember someone who's died, or their actions. And I have two particular people that in mind in my extended family, and one of them is my uncle, who died at 92 in April, so kind of in the beginnings or middles of during this COVID time. And my uncle Marty, what I remember about him is that he accepted all of anybody. There was not like a bone in his body that was going to turn someone away. That doesn't mean that he was perfect. You know, he had untreated bipolar for a lot of his life, and some of his actions towards his family at times were harmful. And yet, he was given the grace, given the chance to have enough time in his life before he died to get diagnosed and have more skillfulness in those actions that had been harmful. But what I remember about him, and what so many people wrote about him, is how accepting a person he was of people. And so when I think of my Uncle Marty, I think of this person whose arms I could just walk into. And there would always be this smile. And when I read through the condolences of his obituary this morning, that's what kept coming up again and again. You know, people worked for him for like 40 years and felt like a part of his family. And I thought, oh, that's an action, right? That's an action that stayed with him after he's gone. And then on the flip side, I was thinking about my mother. And my mother was an active alcoholic for a lot of my years of growing up. There was a period here there of like 10 years where she wasn't. But most of the time, on either end of those 10 years, she was a pretty active alcoholic. And I remember as she was dying, being very grateful to be there through her transition into the next world, and then being so relieved that she was dead. And being really angry because the only actions that I could remember right after my mother died were the ones that were harmful. Yeah, they were the harmful actions. And those stayed with me for about two to 3 years after she died. And it was only once I could get far enough away from her death that I had enough context to see that so many of her actions, just like with my Uncle Marty, right? So many of those actions came from her own mental illness, her own battle with depression, her own trauma of being left as a child by a father, because of his addiction. And when I remember her own suffering, then I can make sense of her actions. And it's not that I condone them, but I can reckon with them more honestly and see them from this larger stage. And then that makes the room for some of those memories, some of those actions that actually weren't harmful. That is, it wasn't all or nothing. and I think about kind of some of the things that my mother gave up, a woman of that time, right? She was born in 1933. And so she was one of the women who basically gave up a career to raise a family, probably a bit not of her choice, but to get away from her own family. So I guess that is a choice in a way. But so she was not a natural mom. She came to it in her own way. And so one of the memories I have of her is this action, this right action of making a skirt for me when I was in Brownies. And my mother, she really did not like to do this kind of thing. But this skirt was so ugly. But she had to make it for square dancing, I think. And I remember that now as this action full of grace in that moment. And I can see it, that it was mixed in with also all this suffering. Like I can imagine how difficult some of these choices were. So it all feels very messy to me, this right action, because if my mom had the ability or the willingness or the intention in the midst of her own disease, and any of us who deal with addiction, right, know this. I've dealt with it in my own addiction, that right action is so absent in the moment of addiction, right? If I could have in my own battle with addiction stopped for a moment and said to myself, asked myself, is this going to harm myself or somebody else or all of us together? Then I naturally would have stopped, right? That would have been, if I could have reflected in that moment, I would have stopped doing what I was doing because of the harm it was causing. And yet, that's where it goes back to the Buddha talking about the need for this attention and this intention and this mindfulness, because I didn't have any of those things when I was in the middle of addiction. My mother didn't have any of them when she was in the middle of addiction. And so I think about that struggle, that question of honesty, and what Lee is talking about, how one action can lead to another and another until it gets larger and larger, and how any one of us in any moment can be given this gift of grace to be able to see in that moment, oh my gosh, this is hurting me and everybody else around me. And I feel like my uncle was so fortunate because he got that chance, right? He got that chance to see the impact of his actions, and he was able to shift. And then I look at my mother and I see that she wasn't. And I look at my own life and think, wow, well, my own kids got some of me in the middle of it and some of me beyond it. And so they are the heir to my actions, right? And so it all feels so connected, like Lee was saying, and also messy because it is so connected. And that's where sometimes I have the trouble with what the Buddha says, because he makes it sound so easy. And I feel like it is so hard, you know? It's so hard. So I think that's what I wanted to share with you. Lee, is there something you want to add to that?
A little, yeah. As Traci was saying, talking about, who we're harming. I think that's important also, you know, as you know, if it seems as though we're harming, you know, like some creature that's not really important, that's actually innocent, we're harming ourselves, which is sometimes pretty easy to overlook, and it is important not to overlook. And Traci and I talked earlier about how this is this loop, you know, of informing ourselves, and then that informs our next actions, and you know, like, and then those actions, you know, inform our view again, and then our view informs our you know, follow-up actions. And at any point, we can jump in there and look carefully at what we're doing. And this part about right action has its part in the loop of the Eightfold Path, which we could talk about forever, and we may just wind up doing just that.